Along the largest river in the world, 4,100 miles long, lives an ancient civilization of buzzing people. The founders of so many incredible inventions we take for granted today reside along the Nile in cities protected by their gods and beloved pharaohs. We are taken back to the time period between 3,500 BC to 30 BC, where history is made and time is paused. Welcome to ancient Egypt and the Nile River. Ancient Egypt's geography along the Nile River consists of two divided regions, Upper and Lower Egypt. On the map of Egypt, the upper region is located in the south and the lower is located in the north. The titles for the areas are opposite because their names were fashioned due to the water of the river flowing in the northern direction. In eastern Egypt, the Red Sea is the water source. In the northern area, the Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea, and across the river from Lower Egypt is the Eastern Desert. The Western Desert is crosswise from its brother. The people resided in temples and palaces, constructed man-made canals to benefit from the Nile and access the river easier. Movement is never-ending in this prehistoric empire. The people walk near and far to get where they are going, though roads and streets weren't very common. Floating in their precious river was the real means of travel. In 4000 BC, boats made from the papyrus plant were common and worked well for fishing or short trips. Later, new sources were used for longer distances. Acacia wood imported from a trade ally, Lebanon, was created with sails to head up sea by the catch of the wind. Larger boats used to hold cargo were utilized for trade with other countries to get imports and exports where they needed to be. Trade was massive between the civilization of ancient Egypt and other early empires, as it was a way to survive for their citizens. Egypt was said to be the center of trade, though it was only allowed in marketplaces in their homeland. As said, the Nile was a great source of movement to barter goods in, but the eastern and western deserts were advantages as well. Of course, the Mediterranean Sea and Red Sea cannot be forgotten either. Egypt exports were their most common resources: papyrus, linen, wheat, and gold. In return, Egypt received incense, myrrh, and oils from Punt, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedarwood from Lebanon, ivory, copper, cattle, leopard skins, and spices from Nubia, silver, iron, cedar logs, and horses from Levant, and several more metals from other allies. In 400 BC, currency in Egypt turned into coins made from gold, silver, and bronze, making trade even more popular. The agriculture shined in ancient Egypt, as the Nile River provided a great water source for harvesting. The main crops consisted of wheat, barley, lettuce, beans, onions, figs, dates, grapes, melons, cucumbers, and flax, which was grown to produce linens. Mineral products were founded in Egypt as well, like sandstone, limestone, granite, copper, gold, tin, and multiple gems. While traveling on the Nile in this time in Egypt, monumental architecture and urban planning was bound to be seen. Buildings were assembled from the mud off of the banks of the river to make sun-dried blocks. As an everyday citizen would live in an adobe made of mud, the elites had multi-roomed mansions and courtyards put together by the dried bricks and limestone from the hills along the Nile. Palaces had walls around them for defense and decor, called sereka, as well. But those weren't quite what would catch your attention if you were sailing on the river. What would, you might ask? How about the massive temples or the pyramids of Giza? On the west bank of the Nile, this wonder of the world was erected around 2550 BC. It consists of the Great Sphinx and the pyramids of the Chain of Kings, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The Pyramid of Khufu is called the Great Pyramid because it is the largest of them all, at 481.4 feet. It is made up of 2.3 million blocks of stone and is estimated to weigh 5.75 million tons. Khufu's son's pyramid, Khafre's, might look larger, but it only appears that way because it is on higher land. Khafre's son's pyramid, Menkaure, is the smallest of all three at the height of 220 feet. The Sphinx guards all of the pyramids, though its sandstone structure stands only at 66 feet tall. Also on the west bank of the Nile, across from the city of Luxor, is the Montuuri Temple of Hatshepsut. The temple is 97 feet high and named after the queen who ruled Egypt from 1479 to 1457 BC. In the city of Thebes, near the east bank of the Nile, is the Luxor Temple. The temple was the center of the festival of Opet and dedicated to the Egyptian gods Amun, Mut, and Ka. Egyptian gods were the center of religion in ancient Egypt. Cities would normally claim a patron god for each town, but villagers worshipped many deities, never just one. The famous lists of gods include Amun-Re, the representative of wind, fertility, and secrets, as well as being the god of pharaohs; Horus, the falcon god and son of Oasis and Isis; Seth, the god of war, strength, storms, and deserts; Isis, goddess of magic and fertility; Sobek, a famous crocodile god that symbolizes strength; and Anubis, the god of death and the underworld. Egyptians were obsessed with afterlife. The people made it a requirement to ensure the bodies of the dead would be preserved in their tombs and pyramids. They did so by the mummification process. This lasted 70 days, beginning with removing all the organs, burying them with the body, and wrapping the deceased in linen fabric. Regardless of the craziness and oddity of their religion, the Egyptians took it entirely serious. Death was significant, but their beliefs considered to be polytheistic, which means the importance of family and the pharaoh at the core of their traditions. The pharaoh was also at the core of their theocratic government. He was the living god and was given limitless power over the ancient civilization. While nobles like priests, viziers, army commanders, ministers of public works, and chief treasurers answered directly to their king, the pharaoh and their queens were the elites. The timeline of rulers consists of kings and queens who ruled before. The list begins with Sneferu, who ruled from 2613 to 2589 BC. Khufu led from 2589 to 2566 BC. Pepi led Egypt in 2250 BC. Hatshepsut, a female, ruled between 1479 to 1457 BC. Thutmose III ruled from 1479 to 1425 BC. Amenhotep III ruled between 1390 to 1352 BC. Akhenaten ruled from 1352 to 1336 with his wife Nefertiti. Tutankhamun ruled between 1336 to 1327 with his wife Akhenaten alongside. Another name for King Tutankhamun is King Tut. Ramses II, who led from 1279 to 1213 BC with his wife Nefertari, were great leaders of Egypt. Merenptah ruled from 1213 to 1203 BC. Ramses III led from 1187 to 56 BC. And finally, Cleopatra VII ruled from 51 to 30 BC as the last pharaoh of Egypt. The ancient Egyptians believed family is just as important as the elites. When one member of a family was to go against the law, the entire family could be punished. Lifestyles in Egypt then were a lot different than how they are now. Polygamous marriages were very common, meaning husbands had several wives. The women did have less of a standing in social classes, but they were not treated poorly. Females had the opportunities to own property, testify in court, and conduct business dealings, but their main and most general responsibilities entailed working at home, preparing meals, and raising their families. At the bottom of the social standings were peasants who lived off the land. They farmed to make a living, but taxation did exist through trade labor and the crops they made, so it was very difficult to reach anything above their underprivileged wage. The education system in ancient Egypt depended upon family tradition and social classes. It began with children, naturally. Kids stayed with their mothers until the age of 4 at home. After that, an education for males was provided. Ladies stayed at home to be taught how to work around their house by their mothers. Sons generally followed in the same trade as their father practiced, but children still could attend a village school or study a specific career, such as a priest or scribe. Schools taught writing, reading, math, sports, morals, and manners. Once young boys reached the age of 14, sons would normally join their fathers in their occupational paths. Children of the nobles and royalty, including the young girls, could continue education at special schools attached to temples or palaces. This higher level of learning was called instruction of wisdom and taught ethics and morality. Ancient Egyptians were quite possibly the first to practice scientific arts out of all the other early civilizations. The people surpassed in medicine and applied mathematics. Though there was no record on how the scholars reached their conclusions, they sure were brilliant. They came up with a decimal system using 7 different symbols to create equations and add with numbers. But math and medicine discoveries weren't the only areas of education the Egyptians excelled in. Literature was second nature to them as well. Literary devices such as similes, metaphors, alliterations, and puns were found amongst the written language of these ancient citizens. The script they invented to write was called hieroglyphics. With this, beliefs, history, and ideas were stored in temples, on tomb walls, and upon papyrus scrolls with black ink. Black ink was an invention from the people of Egypt as well. They created it by mixing vegetable gum, soot, and beeswax together. Literature that became common in ancient Egypt was anywhere from hymns to the gods, to mythological stories, to biographies, to history, and even to poetry. A very well-known form of writing from this period long ago is the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead, or as the Egyptians would say, Pert Haru, had magic spells and formulas printed on papyrus scroll. This book originated around 1600 BC. It was intended to be read by the deceased as a guide on their journey to the underworld. This reflected the Egyptian culture because, as stated earlier, the people were very concerned on where their next life shall be taken. The gods were to protect the deceased and ensure that they got to their afterlife. One of the finest and most complete examples of this type of ancient Egyptian funerary text is titled the Papyrus of Ani. Egypt created some outstanding inventions that changed the way of life since the day it was produced. Several of the contraptions are still used in everyday existence. The ox-drawn plow was first thought of and put to use in ancient Egypt. This helped with agricultural purposes and the crops immensely because the power and speed of an ox plowing soil was a lot quicker than any human hands. As discussed multiple times throughout this journey in the Nile River Valley, papyrus sheets were made from the popular plant that grew in the waters of the river. The papyrus plant was then turned into a material and used for writing on and to create boats, mats, sandals, baskets, and more. The well-educated minds of the people in ancient Egypt toward the medical field benefited when the creation of surgical instruments came about. Small operations were done with the tools to gain more knowledge on therapeutic and health. The first medical manuscript to be discovered from this period in Egypt's history was the Edwin Smith Papyrus document. Listed upon it were 48 cases of injuries from ancient people, along with a list of instruments they used to investigate the human body, including tools like scalpels, scissors, copper needles, forceps, spoons, lancets, hooks, probes, and pincers. Wigs were also a first discovery in ancient Egypt. They were made out of a braid set with beeswax for the people to wear upon their heads when they would shave their hair off for the hot summers. Astronomy is thrown onto the list with the foundings of the sun clock, the water clock, and the solar calendar. The calendar developed 365 days, 12 months, 30 days in each month, and additional 5 days at the end of the year. Ptolemy III, Euergetes of Egypt, decided also to add one day to the 365-day year every 4 years, resulting in the creation of leap year. The sun and water clocks determined morning from afternoon, helped identify the shortest and longest days of the year, and the correct hours for priests to do the nightly temple rites and sacrifices. And finally, the Egyptians' last great invention, the weapon called the khopesh. This was iconic in the ancient times because a curved, thick blade, 2 feet long, would stab any opponent in the Egyptians' way. There was a hook on the end of this creation and would be used to grab the people, and the blade, of course, to finish them off. Many other common weapons were used in battles as well, including the bow and the spear. These were the main ornaments of ancient Egypt's forces. Arrowheads progressed throughout time from stone to obsidian to bronze and finally to iron in 1000 BC. Men would ride on chariots as well during battle for speed and accuracy. Large battles that existed in ancient Egypt began with the Battle of Megiddo in 1479 BC. Thutmose III led 20,000 against ancient Syria's 15,000 and won the battle along with capturing 200 chariots and 2,000 horses to add to the inventory of Egyptian weapons. In 1288 BC, the Battle of Kadesh in Syria took place. Kadesh was under control by the Hittites. When Ramesses II led his army of 20,000 to fight the Hittites, the downfall spiral was brutal. Many Egyptians died in this battle, and Ramesses II tried 6 times, but was never successful in breaking through the Hittite line. When the Hittite people tried attacking again on Egypt, a regiment helped cover the army and destroyed the enemy soldiers. And though this was a great victory for ancient Egyptian history, it was never enough to take the city of Kadesh. It was then agreed upon with the Egyptians and Hittites to sign a peace treaty instead before more lives were lost. The Nile River Valley remains to be the center of Egyptian culture and life today, as it did back through their ancient history. The Egyptians then had set high standards for values, principles, and beliefs. With the outstanding inventions, the oddities of religion, and literature discovered, ancient Egypt will remain to be one of the most incredible early civilizations our world has ever come to know.